streets of the big city. People run the show during the day, but by nightfall, the metropolis becomes the land of rats. They penetrate everywhere. In the multi-story labyrinths of basements and tunnels, these gray rodents have created a population that has already outnumbered ours. There are approximately 2 rats per urban dweller. That is, if we assume that there are approximately 11.5 million residents in Moscow, according to the latest official statistics, then it's about 22 to 23 million rats. There are almost 14 billion rats on Earth, but only the most cunning and hardy species can survive in urban environments. The streets of big cities are inhabited by brown rats, and if you look closely, you will see them near garbage cans and basement entrances. You will hear them in the failing light of hallways. They live wherever people live, because people mean food. Rats are almost predators. Their food ration is 60 to 80% animal source foods. Therefore, they eat everything that runs, flies, or jumps. Everything that they can lay their teeth on. That is, frogs, insects, invertebrates, small mouse-like rodents, birds' eggs, and small birds which they can reach. They even eat benthic mollusks, yanking them directly out of the silt. Most people consider brown rats to be dangerous, malicious, and absolutely useless animals. Let's see what's true or false, and whether brown rats are just unpleasant neighbors for us or real enemies.
Rats are quite flexible. We can see it in all spheres of life of these animals, including their behavior. We can find diversity in every aspect. For example, quantity of rats in a pack varies widely. Whatever biological or ecological feature of this species you decide to study, you're going to encounter an extremely wide range of, so to say, diversity of this feature.
The brown rat, or sewer rat, is the most common rodent on Earth. They originated in tropical Asia, but their ability to swim well, their fertility, and developed adaptability have helped these animals to spread around the world. The sewer rat has coarse, grayish-brown fur, while the underparts are light, dirty gray. The body length is commonly in the range of 6 to 10 inches. Weight is from 5 to 14 ounces. The tail is long, hairless, and covered with ring-shaped scales, with very short and sparse hairs between them. The tail is roughly the same length as the body. Brown rats have a pointed snout and huge incisors that grow for all their lives.
Rats are rodents, which means they have to continuously growing incisors. If they do not wear them down, they grow up to 3 inches per year. Just imagine those kinds of teeth sticking out of a rat's mouth. And so they gnaw wires, linoleum, paper, metal, anything that can be gnawed. They gnaw. They just need it to grind their teeth.
One sewer rat eats 26 pounds of food per year, but it's incomparable with the amount of food that it spoils, making its way into granaries, warehouses, and shops.
One of the zoologists was amazed to see a rat sitting in a closed milk kiosk. At that time, milk was sold in bottles with such lids on top. So the rat has chewed through this lid, and it was not afraid of the observer at all. The rat knew that there was no way he could get it. So after it had chewed through the lid, the rat dipped its tail in the bottle, then very quickly took it out, licked it, and put it back down.
However, spoiling our food is nowhere near the main reason why man declared war on rats. These creatures overrun our cities like a well-adjusted machine. The real danger is that rats can spread deadly infections. And if we don't bring the rat population under control, very soon there will no longer be any place for us in the big city. Brown rats may carry the plague agent. That is, why are rats so dangerous? They live close to people, and so they can pass any infection faster than other rodents. They can spread it either through excretia, inseminating or contaminating our food, or through their ectoparasites, for example, fleas and mole mites. They can bite a person and thus transmit any blood infection. The quiet life of a common Moscow courtyard is disturbed by people in white suits and masks. These are employees of the City Disinfection Center. Their task is to carry out de-ratization activities, that is, to exterminate the rodents. First of all, these baits must be painted in certain bright colors, and they should not look or be shaped like human food products. That is, no biscuits, no cookies, no candies. It's for human security. But, for example, for rodents, they make grain baits. They consist of sunflower oil, flour and grain, and rodents willingly eat them. Workers sort the delivered goods into containers very carefully, because these packages with beige powder and blue briquettes that look like large candies are a bait, a killer delicacy for rats.
We use drugs that have a cumulative effect. That is, for deadly consequences, the rodent must eat much more than one portion.
If you think that there are only people in this basement, you are mistaken. Now, at least 2 or 3 pairs of black eyes are watching the man's actions. They can't see precisely silhouettes of strangers, but their phenomenal sense of smell tells them that the arrival of these people is dangerous for their life.
Rats are afraid of humans. They will never communicate, just hide in the shelter, and that's it. Rats can observe us. Yes, why not? It is interesting for them to see what we are going to do on its territory.
By the way, a rat's keen sense of smell has saved lots of human lives. Have you ever heard of bomb squad rats? Strangely enough, they really exist. Their super-sensitive nose needs only 50 milliseconds to understand what's behind the smell, who owns it, and what is the distance to the object.
Like many other rodents, rats live in a world of smells. Even a small drop of urine is very informative for them. By the smell of urine, a rat can determine exactly who left this smell. And if it's a familiar rat, then our rat will recognize it from this. It can identify the sex of the animal, the physiological state. It can find out whether, say, this male who left this drop of urine was frightened or he was calm, whether he is sick or healthy, dominant or subordinate.
Bomb squad rats begin their education at the age of 5 weeks, and very soon they become certified specialists in demining. Such rats can smell metal or plastic mines, grenades, or just a simple cartridge at 1 meter. But let's return to the common Moscow courtyard. According to statistics, 2 to 3 rat groupings occupy each house. That is about 8 to 10 rodents. In winter, they burrow and settle their nest sites in basements and attics, in walls and garbage containers. And for the summer, they move from the premises to fresh air, to the courtyards of houses, mats of weeds, and riverbanks. Therefore, it is important for disinfectors to set baits wherever they find burrows and traces of rodents. The choice of the menu for rodents is not random. Though rats are considered to be omnivores, they are very picky on tastes.
Again, rodents prefer various forms of drugs. They may come in tablets or granules, or it may be a pasty bait. And here we use the individual approach to residential areas. We know which rodents prefer which baits, and we establish rotation. That is, we alter drugs so that the rats do not build up resistance.
But no matter what tricks experts resort to, rats understand where the danger lies very fast. And they always warn their relatives. The thing is, and it's not a secret, that rats are extraordinarily smart. The question is, how smart? This hungry rat has a difficult task: to get a piece of cheese. To do this, the rodent will have to pass an obstacle course and be creative.
The rat must find a ladder near the first tripod, raise it so that the ladder reaches the bottom shelf, and get to this shelf by means of a ladder. After this, with the help of the rope that is tied to the ladder, the rat pulls the ladder to the shelf where it sits. Then the rat should take the ladder with its paws and line it up so that it connects the lower and upper shelves. Here, this rat has performed very well. Now she climbs into the upper shelf of the first tripod.
The rat seems to deal with all the obstacles on the way to the delicacy very well. But nobody has ever taught it to solve such problems.
And then there's another rather difficult task, because the rat must use the rope, pull the swing located between the two upper shelves. The rat must sit on the swing and use it to get onto the top shelf of another tripod.
So, it only took the rat half an hour to get to the cheese. Well, one good thing, not all rodents can obtain such brilliant results.
Some rats are not able to solve this problem at all. We had two rats once. One of them managed to pass this obstacle course once, and then, knowing the way, it could get to the cheese very quickly. The second rat could not solve the problem, but it had been watching the first rat, and it has built on the success of its wit. That is, when the first rat put the ladder, the second one tried to climb it. So when the rat climbed into the top shelf, it ran after her.
Biologists have no doubts about the intelligence of laboratory rats. But how would inhabitants of urban cellars deal with these difficult tasks? The scientists decided to conduct an experiment to find out. A white laboratory rat is put into a labyrinth. Sniffing, the animal slowly begins to move forward. When the rat runs into a dead end, it returns to the starting point and goes the other way. Finally, it reaches a treat.
Experiments show that rats only need to go through the maze, even the most difficult one, several times, to draw a map of this labyrinth in her memory. Literally, the third, fourth time the rat runs to the part with the bait, that is, if they always put it in the same place, practically without mistakes. No matter how complicated the labyrinth was, we have not yet managed to come up with something that the rat couldn't solve.
Scientists were amazed when they put a brown, in other words, a street rat, into the maze. Having gone through a series of obstacles once, it no longer strayed in the labyrinth. The rat has memorized its way on the first try.
As a rule, laboratory rats are worse problem solvers than the wild ones.
So, if the rat is determined to get into your house, you can be sure that it will find a way to avoid the traps and will get inside one way or another. These animals can squeeze through tiny holes, approximately 4 times less than the rat itself. They sneak inside through pipes, and pipes that have 4 centimeters in diameter are good enough for them. But the most surprising thing is that rats are cunning scouts, and before getting into the suitable house, it will first develop the exit strategy. It's amazing that animals whose brains are several times smaller than ours can sometimes be more cunning than us. Notice how the rat is exploring new territory. The rodent seems to just be messing around, running chaotically, but in fact, its brain captures most of what the rodent sees and feels, including the distance between objects.
At first, the rat moves quite slowly around this room and often returns to the shelter, to its starting point. In such short bursts, the rat familiarizes itself with the room. The rat is stretched out and it moves slowly, and that is how it gradually accustoms itself to the room. But as soon as this job is done, the picture changes. The rat's movements become very confident.
But mental abilities of rats just so happen not to be to the benefit of people. That is, under normal circumstances. Quite the opposite, in fact. However, it is rats that we owe many discoveries in the field of science that can save people from a number of diseases. It is no accident that a monument in honor of not a rat, but a mouse was set up in Novosibirsk. Although, in this case, it is a sign of gratitude, not so much to rodents, as to laboratory animals in general. This rat is one of the participants in the experiment held by a group of Vladimir Zaitsev, a leading researcher at the Priorov's Research Center of Traumatology and Orthopedics. Our group oversees development and preclinical evaluation of osteoplastic materials. That is, those medical products that are aimed at correcting complex congenital and acquired defects in the human musculoskeletal system, associated either with the slowing of regeneration process or with considerable losses of bone tissues. In order to test the new material, the scientist had to remove a bone fragment from the experimental rats in order to implant an experimental sample into its place.
In preclinical studies, we used rat thigh bones. Generally, we performed end-to-end osteosynthesis surgery. Cylindrical blocks were molded from concrete, and a small part of the femur was simply replaced by that cylinder, so that both bases of the cylinder fit closely to the bone tissue and merged with it. Then, in a week or in 3 weeks' time, and so on, we checked up on its dissolving process and on the construction of a new bone tissue between the materials.
The result has exceeded all expectations. In a matter of days, the scientist's development led to the formulation of new bone tissue, and the animals could move again. Scientists are convinced that these artificially created drugs can give many people a chance for a full life. Our institute is, well, at the moment, the first medical institution in the country that has such developments. How come rodents became a perfect animal for experiments? 99% of mice and rat genes correspond to those of humans. For some features, monkeys and pigs may suit better, but they are very expensive to work with. Mice moved on to the top because they are small. They have a relatively short life expectancy, high fertility, and thus they are convenient to work with. For almost 200 years, scientists have used these rodents as main model organisms for testing various ideas in the field of human biology. Studying rats, we learned how antibiotics, alcohol, and drugs affect people. Scientists use rats to test the latest treatments against cancer and Alzheimer's disease. The finest hairs covering the rat tail are used in eye surgery in ophthalmology. For example, there are only 5 such magnetic resonance imaging units for small laboratory animals in the world. On the monitor, you can examine the process occurring in the organisms of experimental rodents in all details. This is done to work out the techniques that will later be applied to people. The rat brain has essentially the same architectonics. the same structure as the human brain. And so, the basic brain functions are the same for humans and for rats. Now you see unique footage. That is how, examining the rats' brains, Russian neurobiologists are developing a vaccine that will help to significantly reduce stroke damage and will facilitate rehabilitation. Here we work with incubated hippocampal neurons of rats. If we learn to control their regulation, then we can help the cell to survive in various stressful situations, including hypoxia or ischemia. I use a morphological criteria to choose a neuron that looks like a pyramidal one. Well, let's say that we are going to investigate this neuron. You see, it's quite big, it's stretched, and it has many dendrites. When a suitable for experiment nerve cell is found, it is acted upon by stimulating hypoxia. The simplest mechanism available in the cell is these channels, which can take responsibility for resisting the effects of hypoxia and keeping the cell in balance long enough for an ambulance to arrive. These experiments help scientists to discover the unique properties of a protein called interleukin-10. It turned out to be able to reproduce the destructive processes in the brain during a hypertensive crisis. It means that if we can activate this protein in time, we can save someone's life. We decided to test whether these anti-inflammatory cytokines, in particular interleukin-10, can influence the nerve cells in pathological conditions. They turned out to truly have a neuroprotective effect, both in vitro and in vivo, that is, on animals. They eliminate the pathological consequences of hypoxia, ischemia, and have an anti-convulsant effect. And so we use this series of experimental works as a basis to file a patent that interleukin-10 can be used as an agent for the treatment of neurodegenerative processes in the brain. And while some rodents help us find medicines for incurable diseases, others continue to spoil our lives. In a large city, rats, well, and sometimes people, live according to the law of the jungle, that is, eat or be eaten. Rodents have learned to survive, leading a cohesive life. One rat pack controls a nearly 500-foot radius area.
The pack size is usually not very large. Rats group is not structured so as the number of rats grows, it becomes more difficult to control the group. That is, as a rule, manageable pack sizes should not be more than 12 to 15 individuals. And most of all, there is a hierarchical way of organizing interaction between animals in such groups.
It means that the pack will have alpha males, whose authority no one dares to challenge, subordinates, that is, working individuals who produce food, and females. In the beginning of April, about 95% of females start breeding extensively. Litters number from 9 to 12 cubs. On average, one female gives birth to 35 cubs annually. Strangely, males do not mate with all females. They single out favorite wives, and subordinate rats get the remaining females. But it is not always so strict.
Sometimes there is a subdominant male in a pack. Subdominant is not exactly a subordinate male. He dominates the group when the alpha male is resting or busy with some other things. Moreover, according to the results of the research, sometimes subordinate male has more progeny than the dominant one because the dominant spends too much time protecting the territory, and currently the subdominant manages to court the females and thus becomes the father of the cubs.
At this point, it's hard to say how many rats have been born. The female constantly covers them with her body so that the cubs do not freeze. But she will not be that caring for long. Literally, a few days after birth, the pups become independent and the female is ready for reproduction again. The only thing the mother teaches her cubs is hunting.
Of course, she trains them in their first days of their independent lives. Infant rats often behave in a certain very characteristic way. That is, they follow. They always follow the mother or each other. That is, they copy their routes, the speed of movement, and when at the moment she finds something interesting, the cubs learn how to deal with that too.
Rats are real nomads and constantly explore new territories. They are excellent divers and can climb ropes, pipes, or trees very well. These rodents can cover from 6 to 30 miles per day. Common rats have a very strong research behavior. Usually they settle near the water. And apparently, since the Neolithic times, they've been settling near people. And they migrate with them. It is particularly evident now when airplanes, trains, and other driving vehicles seem to be transport for these rats. Moreover, new unusual conditions give urban rats a great opportunity to train their natural abilities and instincts. This rat, named Seema, is going to face her first difficult test today. Seema does not know yet whether this situation, modeled for her by scientists, is dangerous for her or not. Therefore, the only thing she can do is follow her natural self-preservation instinct, which will tell her how to proceed. Look, Seema freezes. She seems to be calculating the distance to the ground, trying to understand whether the fall will hurt her. After carrying out these known only to her calculations, Seema decides to walk the rope. She can fall any second, but instinct saves her. And the rat remembers that nature has endowed it with a fifth paw. The tail is a unique tool for balance. And often it is the tail that helps a rat to survive when it tries to escape man or predators running on a thin pipe or wire. The tail is almost as long as the rat itself and consists of flexible tendons. When the rat moves in a straight line, it uses its tail as a counterweight, like a tightrope walker uses a pole. At the beginning of the 21st century, rats came to Barnaul, which is quite a large town, and the way they expanded their possessions was accurately traced. In the year of their appearance, they lived only in the pier constructions. On the third, they reached the city center. On the fourth, took the whole city, and in the fifth year, they began to settle in suburban settlements. But what motivates rats to abandon their homes and go in an unknown direction, endangering the whole flock?
We do not know what motivates them. According to some reports, rats can travel up to 6 miles within the city limits. And given that they advance mainly through underground communications, that is, we cannot see what's happening, where the animals come from, and where they are heading. Moreover, I can tell there is about the same number of males and females. It seems that there should be a typical for young, grown-up animals, which need to settle, but it doesn't work for rats. That is, adults are moving, not young rats. Almost 1/3 of females are pregnant. That is, if it doesn't fit any logic at all.
Migrants, as a rule, are members of one family. It helps rats to quickly detect and neutralize the enemy and provides better survival conditions for the cubs. But what about the famous rat's aggression? What is the reason for such behavior of these rodents? If you see two fighting rats, then most likely you see a clash of interests of alpha males from different groups. According to scientists, alpha males are characterized by the most aggressive behavior. If members of a pack spot a stranger, they are capable of violent murders. The fate of such a rat is terrible. It is simply torn apart. But what happens if two dominant males meet on a new, unknown territory? We decided to conduct a small experiment to demonstrate their behavior. Males from different groups were put in a transparent cage. This territory is unfamiliar for experimental rats, which means that there's a good chance of a fight for the lead. However, look at what happens. Having sniffed a cage, males easily settle in different corners, and things stay the same until the female is placed next to them. The presence of the member of opposite gender means the possibility of reproduction and formation of a new family, which means that the stranger cannot be ignored anymore. And so the struggle for influence and territory begins. However, not all individuals are equally aggressive. Seeing this, scientists wondered how the mechanism of aggression arises and acts in animals. To figure this out, the biologists of the Novosibirsk Institute of Cytology and Genetics of the Siberian branch of the Russian Science Academy has developed experimental animal lines with adaptive and pathological aggression and conducted a so-called glove test. It will help to determine the level of rodent aggression towards a human or each other. Pay attention that the experiment has not yet begun, and rats are already showing obvious signs of aggression. If we take an aggressive rat that attacks immediately without waiting for you to open the door, and it does not let you put a glove inside, then it will be -4 points, the highest grade. This is aggressive behavior, and this rat will no doubt be chosen for reproduction. And if the rat lets you put the glove in the cage and attacks it after that, it will be 3.5 points. The rat gets 3 points if she lets the glove touch it, but doesn't let him pick it up. And if you can, for example, pet it, then it will already be 2 points. But how to explain this difference in the behavior of experimental rodents? All this has something to do with hormones, one way or another. And first of all, with stress hormones. So when you have some impact, you have body response, that is stress. And one of the main ways to find out whether the rat is under stress or not is to measure the glucocorticoid hormone. And actually, our rats had it sharply increased, initially and practically up to the 68th generation. Now, scientists have to deal with the behavior of wild rats and understand their level of aggression towards their main neighbor, humans. And should we be afraid of an attack of gray rodents?
That is an absolute exceptional case, so you shouldn't be afraid of rats' attacks. There are reports of such attacks, but they are isolated, and as a rule, had a clear explanation. In some cases, there are a lot of hungry rats, and then they'll start to eat man. But this happened because of overpopulation and hunger. Rat bite people sometimes, but as a rule, these bites are provoked by the person himself. That is, if you corner a rat, then you will get attacked out of fear, because it is scared, and at that moment, it can bite. For example, a child wants to touch a small animal.
Scientific observations prove that a rat attacks only when it feels threatened. The rest of the time, it tries to avoid any contact with humans. However, we people should pay attention to the behavior of gray rodents because sometimes it can save lives. Everyone knows this superstition, that if rats who live in the holds hastily leave the ship which is ready to sail, it's trouble. The ship will certainly get caught in a storm or end up on the rocks. Moreover, there are cases when rats, trying to escape the ship which has already left port, jumped in the water and swam to shore. During the Second World War, when the sailors saw rats fleeing from ships, which were then torpedoed or hit by bombers. There is another fact that demonstrates the unexplained abilities of rodents. Large packs of rats practically marched out of Stalingrad shortly before the Nazis approached it. But what kind of sixth sense helps rodents avoid death? And most importantly, how do they notify each other of danger?
There are still some channels which are not comprehensible to us. That is an example. I have come across this situation more than once. There is some kind of manufacturing plant, and there have always been rodents there, rats. So in the beginning, the number of animals coming into the plant is more or less stable, more or less known. I mean the number of rats which come to the object from the outside, of course. And then at some point in time, this flow of incoming animals dries up, almost absolutely. And this situation lasts for many months and years. That is, the animals stop coming to the object on which they used to come with pleasure and in large numbers. Why? One could only wonder. I guess that these animals somehow transmit information that it's better not to come to this place anymore. And this information is somehow encoded and transmitted from generation to generation, so that newly born animals living somewhere outside of this object receive this information that they shouldn't come there, because something is wrong there, and it's not good.
Recently, scientists were surprised to notice new habits of urban rats. They have learned to use elevators and public transport. They can orient themselves in time. They know the schedule of janitors and cleaners' work and try to leave their territory at their arrival. There are special lookout rats who warn the pack of imminent danger. That is why people have come up with more and more baits and traps to beat the rodents at their own game. Here, in the laboratory of de-ratization problems, the development of new ways to combat rodents is underway. Now you can see an imitator of an electric rat catcher in action. These are mainly preventative actions, but intensive ones. What measures can we take for prevention? In the cities, we usually put mesh on holes, patch up cracks in foundations, which rodents can use to get inside the building. As soon as a rat approaches the electrical barrier, it is affected by a high voltage current pulse. The discharge does not kill the rodent, but it generates a negative reflex behavioral reaction. It means that getting electrocuted once, the rat will not repeat attempts to approach the electrical barrier. If you install such barriers all over the building, you can be sure that rats will leave it soon. And this device helps scientists to register the changes in the rodent's breath when it's exposed to the action of ultrasonic waves. The rat does not experience any pain. Ultrasound makes the animal feel anxious, and later it will make the rat leave the room. The rat is placed in the blocking device. On the front of it, there is a sensor that measures the difference in the temperature of inhaled and exhaled air. This temperature difference is transferred to the computer through a switch. This curve can be written and used to calculate the reference respiratory rate. Then we turn on the ultrasound sensor, and on this curve, we can determine the action of the signal, the time of its action, and the time it starts. The fact that ultrasonic waves affect the behavior of rats was scientifically verified only a few years ago, and recently, Russian researchers finally ended the debate on this issue. Today, their discovery is the basis for another device to fight rodents. When we tested our sound devices in natural conditions, all the rats left the building in 7 days. However, scientists know cases in which rat populations became accustomed to ultrasound exposure, and when preventative control methods do not work, methods of 100% elimination come to help. We are in the testing center in the Biocontrol Laboratory. It is a facility where we test different agents against rodents. At this special test site, rodents don't live in cages. Their living conditions are close to urban, except that food is given regularly. About 80 animals live here. They have their leaders, subordinates, and outcasts. The latter always stay away from the pack and even eat separately. These animals are direct descendants of wild rats, and in captivity, as in the natural habitat, their behavior is guided only by the survival instinct. Sometimes we release young animals, and some of them get eaten if they cannot stand up for themselves. That is because cannibalism is strongly developed among rats. The polygon is divided into 3 parts. Rats live in one of them, and the other 2 are used for testing the traps.
We consider rats to be our enemies, so we must fight them. Unfortunately, we have to kill them. That is because they are really dangerous, both medically and economically. And they are aesthetically displeasing. And so we are forced to control their numbers. But we are talking about not complete elimination, but about the regulation of numbers, and only in regions where this problem really exists.
We may not like it, but rats have become very similar to people during our neighborhood. Not many know that we have identical hormonal and nervous systems. Like humans, rats have a social structure and gender relations. Living in a big city, our main neighbors have become smarter and even learned to enjoy the progress made by man. So we will not deny that in the confrontation with rats, we will most likely fail. These rodents learned a lesson from the centuries-old struggle for survival and let people be at the top of the evolutionary pyramid today. But who knows, maybe tomorrow our place will be taken by our cunning neighbors, with whom we have been sharing one house for thousands of years.